Yep, it's back to the same old background. Now, I promised you that I would talk about the importance of blood and why the vampire seeks blood instead of brains like zombies do or other parts of the body. And very simply, it's this. The ancients did not always understand the workings of the organs of the body. For example, the Egyptians thought the brain was useless. And when they embalmed dead bodies, well, they wouldn't have embalmed a live body, but we'll talk about that later. When they embalmed dead bodies, they siphoned the brain out through the nose. It was the heart that was the center of the body, so to speak. It was the heart that carried emotion, and it was even the heart that did our thinking for us. And this still carries on, because when we are sad or emotionally distraught, we talk about our heart breaking. We don't talk about our brain breaking. And when we are happy, our hearts sing for joy, and our heart jumps for joy. So the organs, while they did receive some press, it was the blood that the ancients understood, because it's a very simple principle. If you bled, and you bled for very long, you died. It was the escaping of the blood that they understood caused you to die. And it is why some theorists say that menstrual blood was the first blood sacrifices, and why some societies might have been matriarchal or matrifocal, because women bled and they didn't die. That translated later on then into different blood sacrifices, which it was, of course, the sacrifices of animals and even people. It was the spilling of the blood. And this carried on then into vampire tradition, because a vampire still has his or her organs intact, but there is no blood coursing through the body. So vampires sought blood because it was the life force and the energy that kept people alive. Let me check my notes. So this is shown then in the sacrifices. And I think that one of the places that exemplifies this best is in the Odyssey, in Book 11, when Odysseus asked Circe, what's going to go on in the future? And she says, Tiresias can tell you, but unfortunately Tiresias is dead. But you can still talk to him if you perform a blood sacrifice. And that is what Odysseus did. With his men, he sailed to a certain place, and of course the name of the place escapes me now. But when they got there, they sacrificed a ram, and its blood ran down. And all of the denizens of the underworld, or at least those who could, flocked to the place. And Odysseus says, I cut the throat of the 2 sheep and let the blood run into the trench, whereon the ghost came trooping up from Erebus. Brides, young bachelors, old men worn out with toil, maids who had been crossed in love, and brave men who had been killed in battle, with their armor still smirched with blood. They came from every quarter and flitted round the trench with a strange kind of screaming sound that made me turn pale with fear. When I saw them coming, I told the men to be quick and flay the carcasses of the 2 dead sheep and make burnt offerings of them, and at the same time to repeat prayers to Hades and to Proserpine. But as I sat with my sword drawn, and would not let the poor feckless ghost come near the blood, till Tiresias should have answered my questions. The dead wanted the blood. And this was just ram's blood. What would a shade do for the blood of a human? We find out in the form of vampires, who would willingly kill the living in order to take their blood from them. Now Odysseus sees his mother, and he won't even let her drink of the blood until he speaks to Tiresias. And Tiresias comes along and says, yeah, okay, let me have a drink of this, and then I'll tell you anything you want to know. Now, Odysseus's mother did not recognize him, and he asked Tiresias, how can my mother know me? And Tiresias says, let her drink of the blood, and then she will be as she was when she was alive. And she did. And then she did recognize her son. The afterlife of the Greeks was not exactly a happy place. Some, I won't say fortunate people, because fortune had nothing to do with it, except that it was their fate to be great. Some of the great and the noble made it to the Elysian fields, and some made it to the Isles of the Blessed, but that's another class altogether. But they craved the blood because when they ingested it, it made them feel alive. And when it ran out of their body, they went back to being just gray shades. Now, is there any basis, any factual basis for the vampire myth? Because most myths have a kernel of reality or truth or fact to them. There was a theory that came out in the late 20th century that a disease called porphyria, which has to do with the hemoglobin and blood, could have caused the myth of the vampire. The body does not produce heme, I think is how it's pronounced, H-E-M-E, and you nursing students will know what I'm talking about. And it was theorized that this would cause people to go out and, drink blood of others in order to receive the nutrients that they were supposed to be receiving. This was promulgated by a doctor named David Dolphin, but it was largely discredited. I did not know about this until I saw an episode of CSI Las Vegas, when I still had a television. I don't have a television anymore. Where the mystery was that these joggers were being killed and their livers were being torn out, and they couldn't figure out why. And it turned out that a beautiful young woman with porphyria was causing the murders and was taking the livers home and making shakes out of them and drinking them. And as I said in the PowerPoint, I saw it on TV, it has to be true, right? Other bases for the vampire myth might have been that in the ancient days, they kind of buried people sometimes too quickly. And when those live people woke up, they wanted to get out of the coffins. So that could have contributed to the myth of the vampire. Also, we are not that familiar with the dead like our ancestors would have been, because our dead are taken care of by the mortuaries and the funeral directors. But dead bodies will continue to grow hair and nails for quite some time after they are dead. Bodies will also bloat from gases. So if you exhumed a body, you might think that that person was still living on some sort of level because of the growth of hair and nails, and because, hey, they look plump and well fed. And if you pierce that body, then those gases are going to escape, and the body is going to, not pleasant, I've never seen it and I hope not to see it, but that could also be a basis for the vampire myth. Vampires changed a lot from Lamia and Lilith to the modern day vampires, and there were many steps in between, and the evolution really went in a direction that probably Bram Stoker never would have seen, and other writers of vampires and those first people who believed those myths would never have foreseen. So again, my question is to you, why?